2 weeks after the incident at Buckingham Palace, James Mitchell found himself sitting in a television studio preparing for his first major interview. The story had continued to grow far beyond what anyone could have predicted, and the public's fascination with his handling of the confrontation had led to numerous media requests. The BBC had convinced him to appear on their flagship morning program to discuss military service, respect for traditions, and how viral moments can create positive change. James wore his dress uniform for the interview, representing not just himself, but the entire Queen's Guard and the British military. "Guardsman Mitchell," began the interviewer, Helen Morrison, "when you woke up that Tuesday morning, did you have any idea that your day would end with millions of people around the world knowing your name?" James smiled slightly, still somewhat uncomfortable with his newfound fame. "Not at all," he replied. "I was simply doing my job and responding to a situation that required attention. The fact that so many people have seen it is quite overwhelming." "Let's talk about that moment when you decided to break protocol," Helen continued. "What was going through your mind when the tourist was behaving so disrespectfully?" James took a moment to consider his answer. "I think there comes a point where silence isn't maintaining dignity. It's allowing dignity to be destroyed. That young man wasn't just disrespecting me personally. He was mocking everything that uniform represents. I felt I had a responsibility to respond." The interview continued for 20 minutes, with James discussing his military background, the training required to become a Queen's Guard, and his thoughts on how the incident had been resolved. His articulate and thoughtful responses impressed viewers and further cemented his reputation as a thoughtful professional who had handled a difficult situation with grace. Meanwhile, Tyler Brooks was experiencing his own form of unexpected celebrity. His honest response to the incident had transformed him from internet villain to an example of personal growth and redemption. He had been invited to speak at his university about cultural respect and responsible social media use. "I want to be clear about something," Tyler told an audience of fellow students. "I didn't become a better person because the video went viral. I became a better person because someone took the time to educate me instead of just dismissing me as hopeless." Tyler's presentation included the complete video of his encounter with James, and he used it to illustrate the importance of approaching other cultures with respect and humility. He had transformed his embarrassing mistake into a powerful teaching tool, helping other young travelers avoid making similar errors. "When I first posted content online, I was always looking for reactions," Tyler explained. "I thought being outrageous was the same as being entertaining. But real content that matters comes from genuine experiences and authentic growth, not from disrespecting others." The university audience responded positively to Tyler's honesty, and his presentation was recorded and shared online, where it received praise from educators and parents who appreciated his mature reflection on his mistakes. The ripple effects of the incident continued to spread in unexpected ways. Tourism organizations used the story to create educational materials about respectful travel, and military recruitment offices reported increased interest from young people inspired by James's example of service and professionalism. The Queen's Guard itself benefited from the positive attention. Tours of military facilities saw increased participation, and applications for service in prestigious ceremonial units reached record levels. James had inadvertently become one of the most effective recruiters the British Army had ever had. The young man's response to the situation was as important as the guardsman's, observed Dr. Rebecca Chun, a professor of cultural studies at Cambridge University who had written about the incident. It showed that people can learn from their mistakes when they're approached with dignity rather than simply punished or humiliated. 6 months after the viral video, both James and Tyler had settled into their new normal. James continued his service with the Queen's Guard, but found himself occasionally recognized by tourists who remembered the incident. He handled this attention with the same professionalism he had shown during the original confrontation, always ready to educate visitors about military traditions and the importance of respect. Tyler had changed his approach to social media entirely. Instead of creating content designed to shock or provoke, he focused on educational travel content that helped other young people understand and appreciate different cultures. His follower count had grown substantially, but more importantly, his content was making a positive difference in how people approached international travel. The two men had stayed in occasional contact through social media, with Tyler expressing gratitude for the lesson he had learned and James offering encouragement for Tyler's efforts to use his platform responsibly. That confrontation changed both of our lives. Tyler reflected in a year-end video, summarizing his transformation. I learned that respect isn't weakness, and standing up for what's right isn't aggression. Sometimes the most important conversations happen between strangers who choose to see each other as human beings rather than obstacles or entertainment. James, for his part, had become something of a mentor to younger guards who looked up to his example of how to handle difficult situations with dignity and strength. He regularly spoke at military training sessions about maintaining professionalism while standing firm on principles. The uniform gives you authority, James would tell new recruits, but how you use that authority defines who you are as a soldier and as a person. Power without wisdom is just bullying, but wisdom without the courage to act is just philosophy. The video of their encounter had been viewed over 50 million times across various platforms, making it one of the most watched military-related videos in internet history. But, beyond the numbers, the incident had sparked important conversations about respect, cultural understanding, and personal growth that continued long after the initial attention had faded. Schools began using the video as a teaching tool for discussions about citizenship, respect, and conflict resolution. Military families shared it as an example of the values they tried to instill in their children. Tourism boards referenced it in materials about responsible travel and cultural sensitivity. Perhaps most importantly, the incident had shown that even in an age of instant communication and viral content, genuine moments of human connection and growth could still capture people's attention and inspire positive change. As James stood guard at Buckingham Palace on the first anniversary of the incident, he reflected on how that single moment of decision had affected so many lives. A disrespectful tourist had become an advocate for cultural understanding. A routine day of ceremonial duty had become a global lesson in dignity and respect. The palace courtyard was filled with the usual mix of tourists, many of whom had no idea they were being guarded by an internet celebrity. James maintained his professional composure, scanning for threats while representing the best traditions of military service. Occasionally, a visitor would recognize him and nod with respect, understanding the significance of what they were witnessing. The legacy of that rainy Tuesday morning continued to influence people around the world, proving that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with a single person's decision to stand up for what's right, even when it would be easier to remain silent. In a world often dominated by negativity and conflict, the story of James Mitchell and Tyler Brooks offered something different, a reminder that respect, dignity, and personal growth were still possible when people chose to see the best in each other rather than the worst. The internet had made them both famous, but they had used that fame to make the world a slightly better place, one conversation and one moment of understanding at a time. Within 6 hours of Tyler's departure from Buckingham Palace, the first video of the confrontation appeared on social media. Sarah, who had recorded Tyler's apology and James's educational explanation, uploaded the complete footage to her Instagram account with the caption, "Sometimes the most important lessons come from unexpected places. Respect matters." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within the first hour, the video had been viewed thousands of times and shared across multiple platforms. Comments poured in from around the world, with viewers expressing everything from outrage at Tyler's initial behavior to admiration for how the situation had been resolved. "This guard is a legend," wrote one commenter from Australia. "Perfect example of how to handle disrespect with dignity and strength." "I'm so embarrassed watching this American tourist," added someone from Texas. "Thank God he apologized and learned something. This is what real leadership looks like," contributed a user from Canada. The guard didn't just shut down the disrespect, he turned it into a teaching moment. But Tyler's story was only part of what was capturing the internet's attention. Multiple other videos of the incident had been posted from different angles, and each one revealed new details that added to the narrative. A video from a British tourist showed the crowd's supportive reaction to James's defense of military service. Another clip captured the elderly veteran's salute and James's precise response. The hashtag #RespectTheGuard began trending on Twitter, accompanied by thousands of posts sharing personal stories about military service, family members who had served, and the importance of respecting traditions even when visiting other countries. News outlets began picking up the story by early evening. The BBC interviewed several witnesses who had been present during the confrontation, and their accounts painted a picture of a guard who had handled a difficult situation with remarkable professionalism and grace. "He could have humiliated that young man," said Margaret Thompson, a retired teacher from Manchester who had witnessed the entire incident. "Instead, he used it as an opportunity to educate not just the disrespectful tourist, but everyone who was watching. It was masterful." Meanwhile, Tyler Brooks was experiencing the strange sensation of becoming famous for all the wrong reasons, then being celebrated for doing the right thing. His own social media accounts were flooded with comments, and he found himself fielding interview requests from news organizations eager to hear his side of the story. Initially, Tyler was hesitant to speak publicly about the incident. He was still processing his own embarrassment and wasn't sure how to address the situation without making himself look worse. But after several conversations with Sarah and his other friends, he decided that the best approach would be complete honesty about what he had learned. "I was being an ignorant tourist," Tyler admitted in a video he posted to his own accounts. "I went to another country and acted like their traditions were stupid without taking any time to understand what they actually meant. The guard could have just ignored me or had me arrested, but instead he taught me something important about respect and service." Tyler's honest assessment of his own behavior resonated with many viewers who appreciated his willingness to take responsibility for his mistakes. His follower count actually increased as people responded positively to his genuine remorse and personal growth. But the real star of the viral moment was undoubtedly James Mitchell, though he remained completely unaware of his internet fame. The guard was finishing his shift at the palace when his commanding officer, Major William Hartley, approached him for a private conversation. "Mitchell," Major Hartley said, "I understand there was an incident this morning involving a disrespectful tourist." James straightened to attention, unsure whether he was about to be commended or disciplined for breaking protocol by engaging with Tyler. "Yes, sir. The individual was behaving inappropriately, and I felt it necessary to address the situation." Major Hartley studied James's face for a moment before speaking. "The entire incident was recorded and has been viewed by millions of people online," he said. "Your handling of the situation has been widely praised, and it's reflecting very positively on the regiment." James was stunned. "Millions of people, sir?" "The video has been shared across every major social media platform," Major Hartley explained. "News organizations from around the world are requesting interviews, and the palace has received hundreds of messages of support for your actions." The major pulled out his phone and showed James several of the videos that had been posted. James watched himself confront Tyler, deliver his speech about military service, and guide the situation toward a positive resolution. Seeing himself from an outside perspective was surreal, and he was surprised by how commanding his presence had been in the moment. "Have I violated any regulations, sir?" James asked, still concerned about the consequences of his actions. "On the contrary," Major Hartley replied, "you demonstrated excellent judgment and represented the Queen's Guard with distinction. The palace administration has asked me to convey their appreciation for how you handled a delicate situation." As word of James's internet fame spread through the barracks, his fellow guardsmen gathered to watch the various videos that had been posted. The common room filled with laughter and cheers as they watched their colleagues stand up for military honor and tradition. "Look at Mitchell go!" shouted Guardsman Davis, James's roommate. "I've never seen you that fired up, mate." "The lad had it coming," added Sergeant Williams, a veteran with 15 years of service. "We've all wanted to say something like that to disrespectful tourists, but Mitchell actually did it." The support from his unit meant everything to James, who had been worried that his actions might be seen as inappropriate or attention-seeking. Instead, he found himself being congratulated by soldiers who had watched him defend the values they all shared. Back in America, Tyler Brooks was discovering that viral fame came with both positive and negative consequences. While many people appreciated his apology and personal growth, others were less forgiving of his initial behavior. His university received several complaints about his conduct abroad, and he found himself called into meetings with administrators who were concerned about the school's reputation. "I understand that you've apologized and learned from this experience," said Dean Patricia Morrison during one such meeting. "However, your behavior reflected poorly on our institution and on American students studying abroad." Tyler accepted the criticism and used it as motivation to become a better representative of his country and his school. He began researching military traditions and cultural respect, transforming his embarrassing mistake into a genuine learning opportunity. The story continued to evolve as more details emerged and additional perspectives were shared. Military families from around the world posted videos expressing their appreciation for James's defense of service members. Veterans organizations praised his handling of the situation, and tourism boards used the incident as an opportunity to educate visitors about respectful travel. The British Army's official social media accounts shared some of the positive coverage, highlighting James's professionalism and the important work done by ceremonial guards. The posts generated thousands of supportive comments from people who had served or who had family members in military service. "This is why we serve," wrote one retired soldier, "to maintain standards and defend the values that matter." As the day ended, James Mitchell prepared for bed completely unaware that his morning confrontation with a disrespectful tourist had become one of the most watched and discussed incidents in recent internet history. He had simply done what he felt was right in the moment, standing up for his uniform, his service, and the traditions he had sworn to protect. The viral video was still spreading across the globe, inspiring conversations about respect, military service, and cultural understanding that would continue for weeks to come. James had become an unexpected symbol of dignity and professionalism, proving that sometimes the most powerful responses come from those who understand the true meaning of honor. The silence stretched across the palace courtyard like a held breath. Tyler Brooks found himself at the center of dozens of expectant gazes, each person waiting to see whether he would rise to meet the moment or continue his descent into deeper disgrace. His phone was still recording, though his hand trembled slightly as the weight of the situation finally settled on his shoulders. For several long seconds, Tyler's face showed the internal battle between his pride and his growing understanding of what he had done. James Mitchell remained perfectly still, but his eyes never left Tyler's face, giving the young man the space he needed to make his choice, while making it clear that this was Tyler's last opportunity to handle the situation with dignity. Finally, Tyler lowered his phone and took a deep breath. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than it had been all morning, stripped of the arrogant confidence that had characterized his earlier performance. "You're right," Tyler said, the words coming out slowly as if each one required effort. "I was completely out of line, and I'm sorry." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd, but Tyler wasn't finished. He seemed to understand that a simple apology wouldn't be sufficient to address what he had done. "I came here thinking this was all just for show," Tyler continued, looking directly at James. "I thought you guys were just actors or something, and I treated you like you weren't even human. That was wrong, and I'm genuinely sorry for disrespecting you and your service." James nodded slowly, acknowledging the apology while maintaining his authoritative bearing. "Thank you," he said simply. "That takes courage, and I respect that." The transformation in the atmosphere was immediate. Where moments before there had been tension and anger, now there was something approaching reconciliation. Several tourists began to applaud again, but this time they were applauding both men, Tyler for his willingness to admit his mistake, and James for his handling of a difficult situation. But the story was far from over. Tyler's phone had been recording during his apology, and multiple other people in the crowd had captured the entire exchange from beginning to end. Within minutes, the first videos would be uploaded to various social media platforms, and, by the end of the day, the incident would be spreading across the internet at viral speed. Sarah approached Tyler and put her hand on his shoulder. "I'm proud of you for apologizing," she said quietly. "That wasn't easy, but it was the right thing to do." Tyler nodded, still processing what had just happened. "I feel like an idiot," he admitted. "I was so focused on getting content for my channels that I completely forgot these are real people doing important work." James, overhearing this exchange, made a decision that would add another layer to the story that was already becoming legendary. He stepped slightly out of his formal position and addressed Tyler directly. "If you're genuinely interested in learning," James said, "I can tell you what it really means to serve in the Queen's Guard." Tyler's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. "I would really like that," he replied. What followed was a brief but powerful education that transformed not only Tyler's understanding but also provided an unforgettable experience for everyone who witnessed it. James explained that becoming a Queen's Guard required years of military training and that the men who stood watch at the palace were active soldiers, not ceremonial actors. "We serve in combat zones," James explained. "Many of us have deployed to Afghanistan, Iraq, and other dangerous locations. The ceremonial duties at the palace are an honor that we earn through our service, not a job we apply for." Tyler listened with growing amazement as James described the physical and mental demands of standing guard for hours in all weather conditions, the precision required for the changing of the guard ceremony, and the deep sense of responsibility that came with protecting one of the most important locations in Britain. "I had no idea," Tyler said, his voice filled with genuine respect. "I thought you guys just stood there for pictures." "That's what many people think," James replied. "But every man who wears this uniform has sworn an oath to serve his country, and we take that oath seriously every single day." The crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation was now receiving an impromptu lesson in British military tradition, and many people were clearly moved by James's explanation. Children who had been with their families began asking questions about the Guard's uniform and duties, turning what had started as an ugly incident into an educational opportunity. An elderly veteran who had been watching from the back of the crowd stepped forward and saluted James. "Thank you for representing us so well, soldier," he said. "My grandson is serving in Afghanistan right now, and I'm proud to see the standards being maintained at home." James returned the salute with perfect precision, and Tyler watched this exchange with growing understanding of what he had nearly destroyed through his thoughtless behavior. The guard he had mocked wasn't just an individual. He was part of a larger community of service members who supported each other and upheld shared values of honor and duty. As the crowd began to disperse, many people approached both Tyler and James to express their appreciation for how the situation had been resolved. Tyler found himself in conversations with families from different countries who shared their own perspectives on military service and respect for traditions. A family from Germany told Tyler about their own military traditions and how important it was to maintain respect for service members. A couple from Japan explained how ceremonial guards at their own cultural sites were treated with reverence, not as entertainment. "You've learned something today that many people never understand," an older British woman told Tyler. "Respect isn't just politeness, it's recognition of sacrifice and service." Tyler spent nearly an hour talking with various tourists and locals, each conversation deepening his understanding of what he had almost lost through his disrespectful behavior. By the time he and his friends prepared to leave, he had gained a completely different perspective on travel, cultural respect, and personal responsibility. Before departing, Tyler approached James one final time. The guard had returned to his ceremonial position, but he acknowledged Tyler's approach with a slight nod. "I want to thank you again," Tyler said quietly. "You could have just let me make a fool of myself, but you gave me a chance to learn something important. I'll never forget this." James maintained his formal posture, but spoke quietly enough that only Tyler could hear. "Use this experience to become better," he said. "That's all any of us can do." As Tyler and his friends walked away from the palace, the young man was already thinking about how to tell this story to his online followers. But instead of the mocking content he had originally planned to create, he now had something much more valuable, a genuine story of personal growth and the importance of respect for others. Meanwhile, the videos that multiple people had recorded were already beginning their journey across the internet. The footage would be shared, commented on, and analyzed by millions of people around the world. But the true impact of the incident was just beginning to unfold. James returned to his duties, unaware that he was about to become one of the most famous guards in the history of Buckingham Palace. His decision to speak up for dignity and Respect had created a moment that would resonate far beyond the palace gates, inspiring discussions about honor, tradition, and the importance of treating others with respect regardless of their circumstances. The moment Tyler's hand moved toward the rifle, something fundamental shifted in James Mitchell's stance. His years of military training kicked in with lightning speed, but it wasn't the automated response of a soldier detecting a threat. It was the measured reaction of a man who had finally reached his limit. In one fluid motion, James stepped forward, his voice cutting through the morning air with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed instantly. "Stand back from the Queen's Guard." The command rang out across the palace courtyard like a gunshot, causing every tourist within 50 yards to freeze in place. Tyler stumbled backward, his phone nearly slipping from his grip as he found himself face to face with a man whose entire demeanor had transformed from ceremonial statue to active soldier in the span of a heartbeat. James's voice carried the weight of 6 years of service, countless hours of training, and generations of military tradition. But more than that, it carried something personal, a pride that had been pushed too far and was now defending itself with the full force of righteous anger. "You will show respect to this uniform, to this position, and to the crown we serve," James continued, his eyes locked directly onto Tyler's shocked face. "This is not a game. This is not entertainment, and we are not props for your amusement." The entire courtyard had fallen silent. Dozens of phones were now recording the confrontation, but the atmosphere had completely changed from Tyler's earlier mockery to something far more serious and charged with tension. This was no longer a young man making fun of a guard. This was a representative of the British military asserting his authority and demanding the respect that his position deserved. Tyler's friends stood frozen, recognizing that their companion had pushed things too far, but unsure how to intervene. Sarah covered her mouth with her hands, realizing that Tyler's behavior had triggered a response that could have serious consequences for all of them. But Tyler, despite being clearly shaken by the guard's sudden transformation, wasn't ready to back down completely. His social media persona had been built on not backing down from confrontation, and he could see that this incident was being recorded by multiple people. In his confused thinking, he believed that continuing the conflict would somehow make him look stronger to his online audience. "Hey man, relax," Tyler said, trying to regain his composure while keeping his camera running. "I wasn't actually going to touch anything. I was just making a point about how uptight you guys are." James took another step forward, his presence now commanding the entire space around him. The transformation was remarkable, where moments before there had been a motionless ceremonial figure. Now stood a soldier whose authority was absolute and undeniable. "You were making a point about disrespect," James replied, his voice steady but carrying an edge that made it clear he was not open to negotiation. "You came to our country, to our palace, and decided that centuries of tradition were worthy of your mockery. You treated a British soldier as if he were a piece of furniture put here for your entertainment." The crowd that had gathered was completely captivated. Many of the tourists were visitors from other countries who had come to London specifically to witness the famous Queen's Guard. And they were now seeing something unprecedented, a guard breaking his ceremonial silence to defend the honor of his position. An elderly woman from Scotland stepped forward slightly and nodded approvingly at James. "Good for you, lad," she said quietly. "Some people need to be reminded of what respect means." Her comment seemed to give James additional strength, reminding him that he wasn't just defending himself, but representing the values and traditions that millions of people held dear. The Queen's Guard wasn't just a tourist attraction. It was a symbol of stability, honor, and continuity that connected modern Britain to its long and proud history. Tyler, perhaps sensing that the crowd was not on his side, attempted to shift the narrative. "Look, I'm sorry if I offended anyone," he said, though his tone suggested the apology was more strategic than sincere. "I'm just an American tourist trying to have some fun. I didn't know you guys were so sensitive about this stuff." The word sensitive was exactly the wrong choice, and James's expression hardened even further. "Sensitive?" he repeated, his voice now carrying a dangerous quiet that was somehow more intimidating than his earlier shout. "Let me tell you what sensitive means, young man." James stepped back and assumed a position of attention that was picture-perfect in its precision. Every line of his uniform was straight, every movement was controlled, and his bearing demonstrated the result of countless hours of training and dedication. Sensitive means understanding that this uniform has been worn by men who died defending freedom, James continued, his voice now carrying across the courtyard to the growing crowd. Sensitive means recognizing that the traditions you're mocking have been maintained through 2 world wars, through terrorist attacks, and through every challenge this nation has faced. The impact of his words was immediate and profound. Several tourists began to applaud, and Tyler's own friends looked embarrassed by their association with him. The young man who had started the morning thinking he was creating entertaining content for social media was now the clear villain in a story that was being witnessed and recorded by dozens of people. But James wasn't finished. Years of suppressed frustration with disrespectful tourists, combined with genuine pride in his service, had created a moment of perfect clarity where he knew exactly what needed to be said. "You want to know what's sensitive?" James asked, taking another step toward Tyler. "Sensitive is the families who have lost loved ones in service to this country. Sensitive is the veterans who can barely walk, but still stand when they see this uniform pass by. Sensitive is understanding that some things are bigger than your need for entertainment." Tyler's face had gone pale, and his earlier bravado was completely gone. He was beginning to understand that he had stumbled into something much more serious than he had anticipated. The guard standing in front of him wasn't just upset. He was representing something profound and important that Tyler had carelessly dismissed. "I think we should go," Sarah whispered urgently to Tyler, tugging at his sleeve. "This has gone way too far." But the crowd wasn't ready to let Tyler leave without acknowledging what had happened. Several British tourists began to voice their support for the guard, and it became clear that Tyler's behavior had united people from different backgrounds in their disapproval of his disrespect. "He's absolutely right," called out a middle-aged man with a London accent. "These guards deserve our respect, not our ridicule." "Shame on you," added a woman who appeared to be a teacher chaperoning a school group. "You should apologize properly." The pressure was mounting, but Tyler was struggling with his pride and his concern about how backing down completely would look on the videos that were certainly going to appear online. He was caught between his recognition that he had made a serious mistake and his unwillingness to appear weak in front of the cameras. James, sensing Tyler's internal conflict, made a decision that would define how this confrontation would be remembered. Instead of continuing to berate the young man, he chose to offer him an opportunity to redeem himself. "You have a choice right now," James said, his voice returning to a more measured tone while maintaining its authority. "You can continue to treat this as a joke and leave here as someone who disrespected British traditions and military service. Or you can acknowledge that you made a mistake and show that you're capable of learning from it." The courtyard fell silent as everyone waited to see how Tyler would respond to this unexpected offer of grace. James had given him a way out, but it would require genuine humility and a willingness to admit error in front of all the people who were recording the incident. Tyler looked around at the faces surrounding him, tourists from various countries, British citizens, his own embarrassed friends, and the guard whose dignity he had attacked. For the first time that morning, he seemed to truly understand the gravity of what he had done and the opportunity he was being offered to make it right. The morning mist hung low over London as Guardsman James Mitchell adjusted his red tunic and straightened his bearskin hat. At 28 years old, he had served in the Queen's Guard for 6 years, following in the footsteps of his grandfather who had stood watch during World War II. The weight of tradition pressed down on his shoulders as heavily as the ceremonial uniform he wore with such pride. Standing motionless outside Buckingham Palace was both an honor and a test of endurance that few people could truly understand. The tourists came and went in waves, snapping photos and making jokes, but James had learned to block out their chatter. His mind was trained to focus on his duty, scanning for genuine threats while maintaining the statue-like composure that had made the Queen's Guard legendary around the world. The rain had been falling steadily since dawn, creating puddles that reflected the grand facade of the palace. James could feel the dampness seeping through his uniform, but he remained perfectly still. His breathing was controlled, his eyes fixed straight ahead, and his grip firm on his rifle. This was what discipline looked like, not just physical training, but mental strength that allowed him to represent the crown with unwavering dignity. As the morning progressed, the usual crowd of tourists began to gather. There were families with excited children pointing at the guards, elderly couples reminiscing about previous visits, and young backpackers eager to capture the perfect selfie. James had seen it all before. Most visitors showed respect, understanding that they were witnessing a living piece of history. They kept their distance, spoke in hushed tones, and marveled at the precision and dedication required for such a role. But not everyone understood the significance of what they were observing. Around 10:30, a group of university students from America arrived, their voices carrying across the courtyard as they discussed their European vacation. They were clearly enjoying themselves, and James felt no judgment about their enthusiasm. Travel was supposed to be exciting, especially for young people experiencing different cultures for the first time. The palace drew millions of visitors each year, and James took pride in being part of an institution that inspired such wonder. However, one member of the group immediately stood out for all the wrong reasons. Tyler Brooks was a 21-year-old from California who had already made several inappropriate comments during their week-long stay in London. His friends had repeatedly asked him to tone down his behavior, but Tyler seemed to view every situation as an opportunity to create content for his social media accounts. "This is so stupid," Tyler announced loudly, pulling out his phone to start recording. "Look at these guys just standing there like robots. They're not even real soldiers. They're just tourist attractions dressed up to look fancy." His friends shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the disrespectful tone in his voice. Sarah, a fellow student from his university, stepped closer to him and lowered her voice. "Tyler, you need to be quiet. This is their job, and it's actually really important to them." But Tyler was already caught up in his performance for the camera. He had gained a small following on social media by recording himself doing outrageous things in public places, and he saw this as another opportunity to get views and likes. The fact that he was potentially offending people or disrespecting an important tradition didn't seem to register in his mind. "These guys get paid to stand here and do nothing," Tyler continued, moving closer to where James stood guard. "I bet they're not even paying attention. Watch this. I'm going to prove they're just fake." James could hear every word, though his training had taught him to remain focused regardless of external distractions. He had encountered disrespectful tourists before, and the standard protocol was to maintain composure unless there was a genuine security threat. The guards were not supposed to react to verbal taunts or minor provocations, as this would compromise the dignity of their position. But something about Tyler's tone and approach felt different. There was a cruel edge to his words that went beyond typical tourist ignorance. James could sense that this young man was planning something that would cross the line from simple rudeness to deliberate humiliation. Tyler began to circle around James, speaking directly to his camera while making increasingly offensive comments. "Look at this guy. He's probably been standing here for hours doing absolutely nothing. I bet his brain is completely shut off. They probably hire actors for this job because real soldiers would be too smart to waste their time like this." Other tourists in the area began to notice the disturbance. Several families moved away, clearly uncomfortable with Tyler's behavior. An elderly British gentleman approached Tyler's friends and suggested they encourage their companion to show more respect, but they seemed powerless to control him. The situation escalated when Tyler decided to test James's resolve more directly. He moved within inches of the guard's face and began making faces at the camera, using James as a backdrop for his crude performance. "See? Completely brain dead. I could probably paint his face, and he wouldn't even notice." At this point, James was fighting every instinct in his body to respond. His military training had taught him to protect his dignity and the dignity of his unit, but his role as a Queen's Guard required absolute stillness. The internal conflict was intense, but he continued to follow protocol, hoping that Tyler would eventually lose interest and move on. However, Tyler's behavior became increasingly aggressive. He began to mock the guard's uniform, making jokes about the bearskin hat and suggesting that the entire ceremony was outdated and ridiculous. His voice grew louder, attracting more attention and creating a scene that was becoming impossible to ignore. "This whole thing is such a joke," Tyler declared to his camera. "These guys are basically living mannequins. They're not protecting anyone. They're just here to make tourists feel like they're seeing something important. It's all fake tradition for fake people." Sarah tried one more time to intervene, grabbing Tyler's arm and whispering urgently in his ear, "You're embarrassing all of us. Please stop before you get in trouble." But Tyler shook her off, too caught up in his performance to consider the consequences. He had noticed that other people were starting to record his behavior, which only encouraged him to become more outrageous. In his mind, any attention was good attention, and he was creating the kind of viral content that would boost his online presence. What Tyler didn't understand was that he was pushing against centuries of military tradition and personal honor. James Mitchell wasn't just a tourist attraction or a ceremonial figure. He was a trained soldier who had earned his position through dedication, skill, and an unwavering commitment to service. The uniform he wore represented generations of men who had served their country with courage and dignity. As Tyler continued his performance, something inside James began to shift. He could feel the eyes of other tourists watching, some with sympathy, others with curiosity about how this situation would resolve itself. The weight of his responsibility pressed down on him, not just to his immediate duty, but to everyone who had worn this uniform before him. The tipping point came when Tyler reached out as if to touch James's rifle, grinning at his camera and saying, "I wonder if this thing is even real, or if it's just another prop in this whole charade." That was the moment when 6 years of training, a lifetime of respect for tradition, and a deep sense of personal honor collided with one young man's thoughtless disregard for everything James held sacred. The decision that would change both their lives was forming in James's mind, and the world was about to discover that some lines should never be crossed. Sometimes a single moment can turn an ordinary person into an internet sensation. Sometimes that moment involves a centuries-old tradition, a disrespectful tourist, and a royal guard who decided enough was enough. What happened outside Buckingham Palace on a rainy Tuesday morning would spark millions of views, countless debates, and prove that respect isn't just a word. It's a choice that defines who we really are. This is the true story of how one man's split-second decision to defend honor and tradition created a viral moment that reminded the world why some things are still sacred. Prepare to witness how a single act of courage can unite millions of people across the globe, and why sometimes the most powerful responses come from those who are trained to stay silent.